What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome to another episode of Ridiculous Rules, the video series where we go super deep into a rules topic in Warhammer 40,000. Today, we're going to be talking everything about Battleshock and morale. A lot of different games handle this effect differently, including different editions of Warhammer 40,000, which has used anything from failed morale checks dealing physical damage to the unit, to units actually running away from the battle, to the current system, which is Battleshock, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. So first off, let's dive in and talk about what is Battleshock. Battleshock is a persistent status effect on a unit that represents it being frightened, suppressed, or otherwise disrupted by casualties received or enemy fire, and thereby becoming less combat effective and less efficient on the battlefield. This can be applied by a wide variety of effects and abilities, but is most often caused by failed Battleshock tests, which we will cover in the next section. On a failed Battleshock test, you may be Battleshocked, and some other effects may automatically Battleshock a unit, and while a unit is Battleshocked, it gets several malices. First of all, it cannot be affected by stratagems that its controller uses. So while this means that your enemies can target that unit with offensive stratagems to debuff them or get bonuses against them, if your unit is Battleshocked, you can't do that yourself. Now, to be honest, this is a little unclear, a shocking thing to find in a Warhammer 40k rule, I know, because the rule's commentary treats affecting a unit with stratagem being the same as targeting a unit with a stratagem. There are many stratagems in 40k that don't necessarily target a unit, but will project an aura or grant a passive global buff that can still affect them. So to my reading, if you have stratagems that affect units in an area like this, they will not apply to units that are Battleshocked. But this is probably something that you might want to consult your local player base about, how they play it. Now, secondly, if a Battleshocked unit performs a fallback move, this is a type of move that a unit performs while it's engaged in melee and allows them to move through enemies and move out of engagement, it is automatically required to take a desperate escape check. Now, a desperate escape check is normally only required when a model performs a fallback move over an enemy model. But when a Battleshock unit falls back, every single model in that unit must take the desperate escape check. This is a 1d6 test for each model in the unit, and on a roll of 1 or 2 on that test, it destroys a model in the unit of your choice. So you don't have to remove characters or special weapons to it. You can choose your random mooks in the unit to take those casualties. Now, if you have a Battleshock unit that's falling back and taking a desperate escape check for that, and also performs that move over enemy models, you don't have to take multiple checks. A model can only be forced to take one desperate escape check per phase, meaning that if you are Battleshocked, you might as well go over enemy models because you don't really suffer any additional penalties. Now, the last effect of Battleshock is that the models in the unit have their objective control characteristic reduced to 0. This is the OC characteristic on their datasheet and tells you how well a model can hold an objective. Each model within 3 inches of an objective marker will add its OC value to that objective at the end of each phase, and whoever has the most OC within range of the objective will control it for the subsequent phase. This means that, generally speaking, Battleshocked units will not add their OC to objectives and therefore not be able to control them themselves. There is some weirdness with this, however, because it is a characteristic replacement effect. This is a special type of modifier that is applied before any other modifiers that might be affecting that unit. So, for example, if you have other bonuses or malices to your OC characteristic, they're applied afterwards. This could come into play with something like an Ancient in Space Marines, which improves the OC of their attached unit by 1. This means that a Battleshocked unit would take their base OC, reduce it to 0, then add 1 for the effect of that ancient banner. Instead of becoming OC 2 or higher, they would instead just become OC 1. So they're still able to hold objectives and can contribute a little bit to objectives, but they might not necessarily be able to beat off larger and higher OC value enemy units for control of that objective. Keep in mind as well that objective control can never be modified below 0. So if you have something reducing your OC and you are Battleshocked, you don't go negative. You just stay at 0, even if you have a lot of penalties stacked up on you. Battleshocked units lose that effect at the start of their controller's turn. This means that if a unit becomes Battleshocked before its turn begins, it automatically resets by the start of the command phase, meaning that command phase stratagems are then eligible to be used on them, and they are able to score most objectives unless something Battleshocks them again. And we'll talk about that later once we get to the Battleshock step. There are some exceptions to this, however. For example, the Rad Zone Cohort Detachment rule from Adeptus Mechanicus specifies a time frame for Battleshock to persist. It battleshocks you for an entire round, meaning that the Battleshock will not fall off until that round ends. But most commonly, Battleshock will automatically fall off, and this is the case for Battleshock Tests, which we'll talk about now. Now, Battleshock Tests are the most common way to apply Battleshock to units. It is a 2d6 roll that is compared to the unit's leadership value. If the total result of that roll, the 2 dice added together, is equal to or greater than the leadership characteristic of models in the unit, the test is passed. Otherwise, it is failed, and the unit becomes battleshocked. You always use the best leadership value in the unit. So if you have a character attached to a unit that has a lower numerical leadership value, that is an easier test to pass, and so that is the characteristic you would be looking for when you take a Battleshock or leadership test for that unit. Now, it's important to keep in mind that even though Battleshock tests are leadership tests in all but name, there is a distinction between the two. Leadership tests are conducted in exactly the same way, but don't automatically Battleshock the unit taking them. They're usually tied to some ability. A good example are Dark Pacts from Chaos Space Marines, which require you to perform a leadership test in order to successfully perform a pact with the demon and not get your soul ripped out of your body through your nose. Battleshock tests are basically the same thing, but the failure is being battleshocked. That said, there are some abilities that do apply Battleshock tests, like Infernus Marine squads from Space Marines that can apply Battleshock to infantry units that they shoot at. Otherwise, Battleshock tests take place during the Battleshock step, which we'll talk about now. The Battleshock step is the final step of the command phase, when you'll be taking the majority of your Battleshock tests during the game. This occurs just before the end of the phase, so it will take place before most scenario scoring and other end of command phase effects occur. This means that if a unit becomes battleshocked during this phase, they are likely not eligible for scoring, assuming that their OC is reduced to 0 as normal. Now, any of your units that are below half of your starting strength during this step must take a Battleshock check. The starting strength is a determination made when a unit is added to your list. For multi-model units, it is the number of models that compose that unit, plus any attached characters they may have. For single entity units that begin as a single model, like vehicles or characters, your starting strength is instead the number of wounds that a model has. If a unit with an attached character is destroyed, or the character within a unit is destroyed, whichever half of the attached unit combination is remaining reverts to its original starting strength. So for example, a character at full wounds whose unit was killed off is not forced to take Battleshock checks, because you will then use his wounds count as his starting strength, and assuming that he's at full wounds, he's not going to be below half and not going to be required to test. Likewise, a unit that lost its character to precision weapons or some other effect doesn't count them for considering whether or not it takes a test. It just looks at the number of models in the original unit that were remaining. Now, the requirement to take a Battleshock test is below half of starting strength. So a unit with an even starting strength value like 10 would have to be reduced to 4 models in order to be below its halfway point and be required to test. In this case, 5 would be half, so you would have to be below 5. Now, if this criteria is fulfilled, the unit takes a Battleshock test as we discussed earlier in the video. You roll 2d6. If you get equal to or higher than your leadership value, you're good. If you don't, you suffer the Battleshock condition until the start of your next turn. And then because this occurs before the end of the command phase, you can potentially disrupt your scoring, also your stratagem usage on that unit, and all the other effects that Battleshock brings with it. Now, before we move on to the last section of the video, I just want to mention that there are some weird effects in the game that force additional Battleshock checks during the Battleshock step. A good example of this is the Chaos Knight's Detachment ability, which will require Battleshock tests to be taken on units that are below starting strength, not below half of starting strength. Meaning if they've taken any wounds on a single model or lost any casualties on a multi-model unit, they would be eligible to take those tests. Now, according to the World Championships of Warhammer FAQ, these abilities cannot force the subject to take more than one test during this step, but they may change the criteria at which they have to take them, such as being below starting strength like we described before. Now, there is a way to get around failed Battleshock tests. While you can't use things like command reroll on them, because it's not one of the kinds of rolls that command reroll is useful on, you can use Insane Bravery. Insane Bravery is a core stratagem that's available to all armies. Assuming that we're using the current balanced data slate, which at the time of recording is the autumn 2023 data slate, it actually has a little bit of a different effect than it does in the core rulebook. The stratagem costs 1 command point and can only be used once per game. If you do elect to use it, it is used before a Battleshock test is rolled, specifically during the Battleshock step. So you don't know whether or not the unit has passed or failed the test when you elect to use it. If you do elect to use it, you don't roll any dice, the test is automatically passed, so you don't have to worry about that unit potentially failing and rolling and becoming battle-shocked. This is really good if you have a unit that you really need to be able to use stratagems on, is holding a vital objective, or you need to go score some secondaries. Generally, if you have a couple different criteria that you're going to score with that unit, if you pay that 1 CP, it's generally worth doing. It's obviously important to keep in mind that it is only once per game though, so if you use it too early, you can lose the opportunity later on. And if you elect not to use it, there is still a chance that you could pass the Battleshock test normally. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're thinking about using Insane Bravery. It's also important to note that the stratagem can only be used during the Battleshock step. So any other time a Battleshock test is required, for example, as a result of an attack by those Infernus Marines we talked about earlier, or even another effect earlier in the command phase, like Tyrannid's Shadow in the Warp, which comes into play during the command step of the command phase, not the Battleshock step, you cannot use Insane Bravery to prevent it. And with that, those are all of the rules surrounding Battleshock and morale in 10th edition Warhammer 40k. I think the system is a lot more interesting and nuanced in this edition than we've seen in the past, where units will just run away or take casualties as a result of failed morale checks. So let me know down in the comment section what you think about Battleshock in 10th edition. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.